What if everything we've been taught about the world, and even ourselves, was designed to keep us asleep? That's what I explored in this conversation with Nathan Cusack, a man who spent his life questioning everything from education to religion to the very nature of reality. We talk about what it means to be a critical thinker in a society that rewards conformity, growing up around different religions and belief systems, and what happens when you stop following the script. Nathan opens up about his recovery from PTSD, why the system failed him, and how meditation, intuition, and energy work helped him rebuild his life. We explore everything from the nature of fear and control to the power of vibration, emotion, and self-awareness, and ultimately how to live with purpose in a world that often feels upside down. If you found value here, support the mission. Please subscribe and leave a quick review. It helps us reach more men ready to take that next step. Thank you so much. I'm Harrison, and this is the Growth Voyage Podcast. Enjoy. All right, I think we are live.
The red light's on, that's a good start.
Yeah, the red light's on. I think we're good to go. Nathan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Harrison.
Yeah, most welcome. Absolute pleasure to have you on. I'm sure we'll cover a lot in this episode. The way I usually like to start these types of podcasts is at the beginning of the man's journey, right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, talk me through what your upbringing, what your childhood was like, and how this shapes you into the person that you go on to become today.
Right, my upbringing. Well, I was born in Watford, glamorous Watford, and grew up in the town just near there called Rickmansworth. And mother was a retired midwife now. My father was a nurse and had I suppose what you call a typical lower middle class upbringing. But one sister, younger sister, 3 years younger. And how did that shape my life? Well, you know, I think I had a unremarkable, typical childhood, really. Had no sort of big issues as such. My father was an alcoholic, and that was noticed, you know, as I was growing up, and that in itself caused some difficulties, but he wasn't like a violent alcoholic. Just spent a lot of time not quite with it and found that awkward. But generally I had a happy upbringing. My mother is part of a big family from Malaysia. So she's one of 11 children. So lots of aunts, uncles, cousins. And when we got the opportunity to travel to Malaysia, that was always fantastic, seeing all family. My dad was one of 6, but we only kept in contact with one of his brother's family. Partly was the fact that my mother's Asian, so some of the family didn't like that, and that caused a bit of a rift. But the brother and his family had no issues with that, so we had some family there to connect with, which was nice as well. So all these happy memories mixing with family and things. Well, you know, I enjoyed my time at primary school, secondary school, again, uneventful, and had friends there. But how did that shape me going back? I think, interestingly enough, I've always kind of been this person who's inquisitive. I've always questioned what people are telling me is this is the way it should be and how it should be, and I'll always question that. One thing that's just popped into mind, which always makes me smile, was I didn't know the alphabet until I was 8 years old. Well, I did know the alphabet. I knew all the letters. But when my primary school teacher recognised I just didn't know the order in any way whatsoever, I just replied by saying, well, I didn't know it was important to know it in order. I know all the letters, but why do I have to know it in order? And I think that's probably a nice example of how I think. I don't just take things on face value. So that's always been present in my life.
I wonder why that's always been present. Were you encouraged perhaps by your parents to think critically, or do you think you've always just had that nature about you, or perhaps in school a bit, not necessarily rebellious, but just naturally questioning the way things are done.
Yeah, I think that's inherently part of me. My mother's always been do as you're told, follow the rules, and that's good advice in many ways. To be honest, if you want to stay out of trouble. My dad was always encouraging me to think. Actually, he liked to discuss music and films, and he would always like to break it down. Why is this a good film, or why is this perceived as a good film, or why is this music perceived as good? And he introduced me to classical music and got me to think, why is this what he was trying to educate me with better than the modern pop rubbish, that kind of thing. So he always got me to think that way. He read poetry to me. So maybe there was some elements there of encouraging some thinking, but I think it's always inherently been part of me, which is interesting. I think it's a nature thing that I've had.
Yeah, and I think looking back now, it's really a gift having that ability to think critically. And a lot of the time in the school system, there's a certain way about doing things, like you were saying. You've got to know the alphabet, you've got to know how things are done. And I think looking back now, because I always remember when I was in school, I used to always think that I was stupid in a way, or that I wasn't quite understanding what was going on. I always thought I was a bit slow.
Right.
And now I'm looking back, and of course there's going to be some limiting beliefs there when you're younger. But now I'm thinking, actually, that's kind of a blessing in a way, that you're not always absorbing everything that they're telling you to do.
Yeah, you're not part of the mould. You're looking at things a bit differently, and as a result, perceived a certain way as for doing that. But as you say, that's not necessarily a bad thing at all. Yeah.
No, and I wonder how that sort of led you down a certain path now then. So you've had this way of seeing the world. Naturally, as you leave school, that's where society will tell you, and particularly the generation before us, right, okay, here's what you've got to do. Got to go to university, got to get a job, save up, have kids, marry. So knowing that you were already thinking differently from a younger age, how do you think that shaped you then, that belief system versus societal structures?
Yeah, I think it's been like a slow process, but gradually just increasing. I think another thing with growing up, as I said, my mother's from Malaysia, ethnically Tamil, religiously Hindu. My father was half Irish, half English, and Catholic, and I was brought up as Catholic. So I've already had, on a theological basis, this kind of split view. My mother wasn't deeply religious, but her mother was. My grandmother was deeply religious. So when we did these trips to Malaysia, she would talk around Hinduism and her beliefs around Hinduism. So that already got me thinking, well, hang on a minute. Here's, I respect my father's views, I respect my grandmother's views, but they both think very different theologically. So who's right? And then that began the ongoing, perhaps, process there as well.
And I'm interested to hear about what their conversations were like with you, right? Because we model our parents and the role models in our lives, and you're saying you looked up to both of them. And I'm always a big believer that, well, if you have a kid, you present them perhaps your way of thinking, but then open them up to the idea that there could be other ways, and that is just a belief system, rather than saying categorically, this is the way.
Well, I've always had that as well. As I mentioned, my dad was Catholic, and I was brought up as Catholic. However, he actually had a fascination with religion in general. So he was always interested in religion broadly, and he had books on the subject and things. So he was an open-minded guy in that respect. Even though he went down the Catholic pathway, he was very open-minded with it. So that allowed me to be as well, I think. So that was kind of perhaps my first. I mean, when you talk about theology, we're dealing with the fundamentally what's real, what's not real, what's life about kind of stuff. And already, rather than being in a household where you're comfortably perhaps thinking one singular way, it wasn't like that for me right from that point. So that was interesting.
And there wasn't a culture clash or anything like that?
Not for me. Not that I perceived it as. Now, as I mentioned, there were members of the family who didn't agree with this mixed relationship. But from my perspective, no, it was normal. It was just normal to have these differences presented to you. And I said earlier, I think I still feel like I'm naturally the kind of person that would critique it. But I think these events nurtured that and allowed me to sort of open my mind a bit more. I think as I got into my teens, as I said, I had this innate wanting to know, and I kind of put it out to the universe in my early teens, going like, I just want to know what's true. Now, bizarrely, I felt at that stage that meant watch Question Time on BBC, because this is where the best minds are discussing about, systems and how life should be, perhaps in a political sense at least. Obviously, I look back at that and smile, because it's, I see it's all a load of nonsense now. But at the time, I saw that as right. Well, if I want to know about things, you've got to listen to these political experts as one way of how life could be discussed, about how life should be. But moving on, it was in 2013, and I joined. I became a paramedic, joined the ambulance service, and joined a specialist branch of the ambulance service called the Hazardous Air Response Team, and that was based up in Braintree. And when I joined that in my team, there's a guy who thought differently, and had information that contradicted what you thought reality was. He started talking to me about these things, and the first thing he suggested perhaps reading or looking into was David Icke. And I only knew David Icke as a bizarre man who in the early 90s on the Terry Wogan show said weird stuff. He got laughed out of, his being a recognised sports presenter. But I took his advice, but all right, because I like this guy I was working with. I saw him as a very intelligent man, valued his opinions. And when he started talking about, well, try this, read this, see what you think. Okay. And that was my first step to seeing that the world is not as it's presented to us. That was my first step. And it's snowballed since then. So I suppose being presented with David Icke's work was the first time I thought, well, the world really isn't what we think it is. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Sometimes all it takes is just one person who you look up to or you respect to then offer a different perspective.
I'll say, yeah, he was, Mike was his name, and he's still around, still friends. But he was the catalyst for that kind of big jump, I think, to going from what's the world about and what do I need to do to figure it out to, now I'm on a journey. And I kind of knew it intuitively that it was going to send me into deep rabbit holes.
Well, I think this is an integral part of the man's growth journey, right? I feel like there's a danger when you're only surrounded by yes men, when people who agree with you have the same beliefs as you. That's not what you want.
No.
That's not what you want, because they're going to just reaffirm the same story to you over and over and over. And even if you were building a community of like-minded men, for example, and I feel as though that's where the world's going, we're going to really thrive on communities, really strong support systems. If you were building a strong community, I don't think you would want everyone to be agreeable. You would want people, perhaps there'd be a baseline upon which your connection has been built upon. However, in an ideal world, you're going to have people challenging you and bringing different ideas to the table, because I feel like that's where you
need that balance. The old yin and yang sort of point of view. You need that balance. You do. So I think society is not, I don't think humans are meant to live in big, huge communities, millions of people or hundreds of thousands of people. It's too many. I think we're meant to exist in small communities. And my wife likes watching Ben Fogle, and he goes out to all these different wonderful places in the world. And I was watching one with her where he went to, was it South America? Was it Africa? I can't remember, but the jungle somewhere, and staying with this small, close-knit community. And wow, it was amazing to see these people just all on the same page. They just knew what was right, what was wrong. And, there didn't appear to be these sort of frictions and issues. Or if there was, the elder was the one that would speak up, sort it out, and it just fused very quickly. It just was, everything seemed to be in sync and in balance. It was lovely to see it, actually. I think that's what's normal for us. What we're not used to is, trying to mix in and standardizing what, let's say in the UK, what is it, 60 million people. We're all going to have to live this way. I don't think it really works that way.
Yeah, and I wonder at what point does the community turn into a city, right? Because that's essentially what's happened as we've evolved as a human species. At what point does it become too big that...
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert on anthropology or anything. That's psychology, all this kind of stuff. But it just seems getting too many people to be on the same page seems an impossible task. And the only way that can be achieved, which seems to be the case with modern society, is everything's driven by fear. Get a populace in fear and compliant to those who want to tell you what to do. That just seems to be where we're at.
Yes, and once you have that fear drilled into society, then you're able to implement control and know one way about doing things.
And that seems to be what we're normally living by. Everything seems to be fear driven, isn't it? Whereas going back to that example, that small community that Ben Fogle was staying with for a little while, everyone just seemed to be content, relaxed, nothing to fear, and that's where we should be. That's how life should be.
Yes, and coming back to your story, right? You've been exposed to this idea, and you've then started to see the world differently, and that's where sort of your mind started to expand. So
very much so.
Talk to me about that process, because how difficult is it to completely shift your belief system? Because a belief system, it's sometimes you don't even know it's your belief system. It's just your way.
Until it's challenged. Yes.
And that's it. It's your way of seeing the world. And you go through challenges, struggles, which will usually reaffirm these belief systems, right? Because that's your way of viewing the world. So I think it's so important that you get these shifts. And if you're fortunate enough to meet other people who can expose you to different ideas, that's fantastic. Sometimes the shift in belief system doesn't come until you get a wake-up call.
Yeah, I think that's normal. Yeah, but for me it was, Mike saying, "Oh, how about you look into this stuff?" And then I did, and initially it was scary, very scary. I thought, hang on a minute, this is quite frightening. How the world's really run with, secret societies, satanic worshipping people, all this kind of stuff, and they're the ones really pulling the strings. And I was scared because I thought, well, what do we do? We've got to do something about it. And one thing that David Icke used to speak for hours and hours, and I've been to 3 of his shows. One of the shows lasted 10 hours, no notes. He's just talking. with some images on the screen to sort of support what he's saying. And he would explain a lot in these talks about how things aren't what we think they are. But towards the end, he would explain, the question would be, well, what do we do about it? And he said the answer is, we all just have to raise our energies, into love energy, love each other, help each other, don't give in to fear, don't give in to compliance. And I remember at the time thinking, well, is that it? Come on, David, we need something a bit, of structure here. Who do we write to? What do we set up and stuff? But as time's gone on, that initial stuff was that wake-up call to start realizing the world isn't what we think it is, which can be a scary experience. And I think this is a normal process for a lot of people, is that initial, actually the world's very dark and horrible. But then you keep going and you go into more of a spiritual awakening and realizing the answer always lies within, as David was alluding to there when I was listening to him. And it's about raising your own energies. Don't comply into fear-driven agendas. Separate yourself from that, and you focus on raising your energies and act as, being loving to other people, that kind of thing. And that's the answer. That's what you start to realize. It all comes from within, not outwards. It's not about, I've got to change them or change that prime minister or president or whatever, therefore things will be better. That's all nonsense. It all comes down to how we live our lives and how we decide what our intentions are, how we decide to feel and think. That's what matters, and that causes huge knock-on effects in itself. So that's what I've realized, having gone through all of that. It comes down to that simplicity of, it's down to me, what I do, and that will impact on others. Yeah,
this idea that you can quite literally create your own reality by choosing what you focus on.
Absolutely.
And this idea of sort of raising your vibration and filling your cup up, and then you can then spill over and help other people.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, it's, it all sounds woo-woo and crazy, but actually there's even scientific research behind this stuff. There was a guy called Dr. Hawkins, so not Stephen Hawkins, the famous one, but Dr. Hawkins, who was able to measure the frequency of emotions and categorize what is of a low frequency and what were the high frequencies. And lo and behold, the lowest is shame, and not far above that, you've got fear, anxiety. And as you go into the much higher frequencies where love exists and beyond, where you get into oneness and all these wonderful things, the frequency that you emit at these higher energies will impact everyone else, because we're all connected. There's, one way to look at it, if you like, is that we're all essentially energy, or everything's energy. You can look at it in those terms. And again, people will perhaps think that's all a load of nonsense, but we were taught that at school without realizing people were taught we're just energy. We were taught that the most fundamental makeup of everything is the atom. And what is the atom? The atom is right in the middle. You've got your protons and neutrons, then loads of space in between, made up of energy essentially, and you've got these little tiny electrons flying around the outside. So we're 99.99 whatever percent of what that stuff is in the middle, which is that energy. Well, everything's made up of atoms, and that's what an atom is. We are essentially energy. And energy is impacted by frequency. And as Dr. Hawkins identified, our emotions can affect our frequencies. So if we raise our energies into these higher emotions, love and beyond, that will impact on everything around us, because we're all connected by this one frequency, this one energy. Yeah.
All connected by atoms. And
we're all connected, yeah.
It's so true. And I think a great way to bring this back down to the ground is by imagining, for people listening, is imagine you've woken up in a shit mood and everything seems to be going wrong for you. And I don't know, you're frustrated, you're angry. When you've woken up like that, how's the rest of your day gone? And if you haven't learned to regulate your emotions and shift your frequency, that will end up becoming a reality for the rest of the day. You'll be stuck in traffic, you'll get into an argument, you'll attract the exact same type of situation. And I've noticed this in myself. When I haven't been regulated or grounded, maybe I haven't slept as much as I would have liked, or some event has happened.
Life, basically, all these challenges,
That's it.
Yeah.
And what I found is that I will then find myself in conversations which are at the same level of that frequency, and I'm
because you're attracting it.
Exactly. It's like and when you're in this mood, if you're walking down the street, if you make eye contact with someone, that is going to be a completely different experience, whether they scowl, whether they like frown at you a certain way.
It really does.
We create our own
You're
reality.
absolutely right. Exactly right. It attracts. And I think it's important to realize that you don't suppress your emotions. It's not about that. It's not about, oh, I'm angry now, I'm going to make sure I'm not angry. The way you deal with these emotions, whatever the emotions, so it's one of these low emotions, say anger or fear, whatever. The way to manage it is be honest with yourself. It's okay. Emotions are truth. So they are true. They're not lies. They're telling you something. So what you need to do is actually spend time to just reflect, why am I angry? And give you that moment to think about it and reflect on it. And it will always peter out, because you've given it a focus and attention and acceptance, and it will dissipate. The worst thing you can do is try and ignore it and crack on, and that will be just in there until you look at it and face it.
And this is where the practices of Stoicism go into the stronger threshold, right? Where people misinterpret it as, oh, you're not supposed to feel emotions. And it's like the generations before us where the man was known as, let's push that down and carry on. And I think giving ourselves that space, a lot of the time we're always busy, whether it's scrolling on our phone or having a drink, whatever it may be.
Well, it was something you said the other day which made me laugh. You said, I've realised now I don't need to take my phone to the toilet to have a shit. It's just
if you are going to do a shit, you don't need your phone. You don't need your phone.
It's very true. And actually, because I do that bad habit, and it made me think, what am I doing that? Just sit there and do your thing. But it allows, the phone is a big distraction. It removes us from reality. Absolutely, yeah.
Yes, yeah. And I believe if we can make it part of our routine, a habit to, check in with ourselves, how we're feeling today. As you were saying, something's a bit off. Let's give ourselves that time. Let's assess what's going on. Let's not run away from it. Let's understand it. You see, some people see journaling, for example, and think, oh, well, what does that actually mean? What does that do? Writing stuff on paper. But that's just one method. If you just sort of write down, have a conversation with yourself or this part of you that's angry. And as you were saying, anger can be your friend. Sometimes you're in a situation.
So it's telling you something. It's telling you something. It's telling you the truth, but you've got to face it and recognize it and accept it. But the irony is, by doing that, you don't actually make it get bigger. You're actually, okay, put it to bed. That's the key. And I think one of the best things people can do with that, I mean, you mentioned like journaling and all that's great. For me, it's allowing time to meditate and meditate. You know, there's so many things out there about how to meditate and all these wonderful things, but meditation is about living that present. That's essentially what it is. And it can be as simple as focusing on your breathing, nothing else. And just giving you that present moment, because life is surrounded by distractions, and the phone is a great example where we can't help but allow ourselves to be distracted constantly. And in 24 hours, how much time do we just stop and breathe and just sit in silence and allow reset? And, you know, if you meditate for 15 minutes, say, in a day, it can make a huge difference. You're just allowing your mind to quieten down, live that present, and it just automatically resets you.
It's a non-negotiable for me in the mornings, just to get those cobwebs out. And maybe you had a bad dream, whatever it may be, just give yourself that time for yourself. Respect yourself enough to just give yourself 15 minutes. And I think we can play life by our rules. You decide what type of life you want. You decide how you want to treat yourself. And
it's all that, really. It all comes down to our own choices. And life is full of being conditioned to think we have to do things to meet outward expectations from society. It's nonsense. There's essentially two choices in life, and both are acceptable. You know, I believe, you know, it's you can either be a service to others kind of person or a service to self. Essentially, be a nice person, live, you know, raising energies, helping people, or you can be that person who takes advantage of people and stealing from people, wherever it might be. They're both acceptable choices. I think that's an important thing. We can discredit those who are, let's say, service to self kind of people, selfish people. But they're also important, I think, for our learning about, you know, we live in a duality world, essentially, where we see the light and dark, and they allow opportunity for us to decide, well, do I want to go down that path or do I want to go down that path? But that's essentially all we need to decide is, do I want to be a service to others kind of person, service to self other person? Essentially, you're living the present. There's nothing but the present. The past has happened. The future hasn't happened yet. We only ever live our lives in the present. And that's the two choices essentially you can make. And I really think it's as simple as that in terms of, in principle. Acting it out is what the challenge is. That's what the hard bit is. It's you know, making those decisions in life about what sort of person do you want to be in any given moment. But it is, in principle, as simple as that.
Yes, and I think this is why knowing your values, knowing what you stand for is super important. I think a lot of the time when we aren't aware of what boundaries we want in place, what's important to us in life, that's when we get into autopilot and then
you mentioned the university thing. See, this is the strange thing about it, and life will just send you to these ways. But I don't want to go to university. But it's my mum, typical Asian mother. You are going to university. It's going to happen. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to go to university then, because that's what you must do for life. And the irony is, now I work at a university. I'm a lecturer at university, so I've, I went from not interested in going to university to now it's my career. So it is funny how these decisions can affect you. But at the time, the decision was made because I felt I had to. Whereas if I had the mindset now, I wouldn't have done it because I didn't want to. But life takes you down pathways, and actually it's not so much about worrying about where you're going to end up and all the rest of it. It's just about any given moment, be true to yourself, and then that's how you feel good about life. Yeah, and if you're living in alignment, I just love that term, alignment, because you're living in alignment with yourself. And for me, what does alignment mean? Well, it means being peaceful. Your nervous system isn't being activated. You feel lighter. This is what I mean. Listen to your body. A lot of the time we try and rationalize our experiences with our minds, but it's our body that's telling us something. So if you have an interaction with someone and
suddenly getting anxious or a bit nervous, what's that telling you? Maybe your body's trying to protect you from something, or it's giving you a signal. Or if you are angry when you meet someone, okay, have they disrespected you? Then you start thinking, have I got enough respect for myself? Have I got boundaries here? And I think just prioritizing
the highest peace. Intelligence for me now, something I've come to be aware of, the highest intelligence is your intuition. Now we go into really sort of deep stuff a bit. What I believe our intuition is connected with our higher selves. And what I mean by that is time is not linear. And that's been a difficult concept. And I haven't fully understood it anyway, other than realizing that time is a fabricated limitation that we experience on Earth and how we exist. But time is not linear, which means our future evolved selves already exists. Our higher selves, in other words. And our intuition is linked to our higher selves, our well, fully evolved selves that have this higher knowledge. And if we allow ourselves to listen to it, our intuition tells you everything you need to know, really. And anyone who's, how many times have people said, oh, I knew I shouldn't have done that? Because their intuition told them not to, but they went against it and they regretted it. But whenever people have gone with intuition, I don't think anyone's ever regretted going with their intuition.
And how have you learned to get in tune with your intuition? Because people might be listening to this and thinking, well, I get 10,000 thoughts a day. 50,
well, the thoughts, the sort of random thoughts, well, essentially we split into essentially two parts, to put it one way. You got the egoic self and you got the soul. And the ego itself is all associated with the lower energies, the fear, anxiety stuff. And the soul is what's associated with the higher energies and associated with our higher self, our more evolved higher self. And the ego is what does those random thoughts in your head. You didn't think it, but it just pops in your head and those sort of things. That tends to be associated with the ego. And it tends to be quite negative. Whereas the intuition associated with the soul, it's a higher level than that. And it's more of a feeling. And it's the more you trust to listen to your intuition, that feeling becomes more recognizable. And you learn to trust that feeling that comes with it. And it is a higher feeling. As we were saying earlier, Dr. Hawkins recognized that there's different frequencies based on emotions. Well, it's no coincidence when you're in a room where there's awkwardness and difficulty and anger, it feels heavy. It's the lower frequencies. But when you feel that lighter frequency, it feels good. That's what's more associated with intuition.
Yes, and as I've had more conversations about this and how as meditation has become such an important part of my life, I have found that relationship to the intuition has been a lot stronger. I can access it more frequently. And now I'll suddenly get an idea. And as you were saying, if it's positive, I'm thinking, okay, where's that come from? Like, sure, we can talk about the subconscious mind and how it will come up with the solutions to our problems in the background.
Yeah.
But every time I've had an idea and then followed it, which I believe has come from that source, it's ended up being really fruitful.
Exactly that. I'm with you on that. Yeah. And because I've experienced that too, you just learn to go with it and trust it more, and it happens. And sometimes you've got to remind yourself how great that is, that you find a way to recognize what the intuition is and how it will never let you down. And it's a great thing to follow. Yeah. But people who are engulfed with the egoic self, the fear, anxiety stuff, they're shrouded with these lower energies. They don't hear it. They don't connect with it.
Yes. And this is why it's so important to have this perception and get to know the idea of identity, the ego, how our ego is there to protect us and almost keep us in this same state. This is why if you're a man trying to change your life, you're going to be met with all this resistance because it's like, no, hang on, that version of you that you want to become, no, that's uncomfortable. We want to keep you safe. So this is why.
The ego lies to us. It makes out like it's trying to keep us safe, but actually it's trying to limit you. Because when you raise your energies, you realize that essentially, I mentioned, in one way you could look at it, we're all in a soup of energy, essentially. We're all connected. We're all one. And that's one of the big learnings you get, is that we're not all just distinct individuals. We're all connected. And people start to begin to evolve that. I mean, people who've been in relationships for a while, like me and my wife, and we will say the exact same thing the exact same time, or we'll think the same thing at the same time. And it'll be random stuff. Nothing that makes sense outwardly. I won't even know what she's thinking, the words in her mind sometimes. because that's an example to prove we're all connected. And because we're together and we love each other, you get that happens naturally. Whereas the ego tries to think that we're all separated, we're all individuals. And if you ever try to recognize that essentially we're all one, we're not separated, it tries to pull you away from that because you're therefore suppressing the ego.
This is why I have strong opinions about division in our society and being very careful about this whole left versus right.
The
Muslim
left-right political
versus
paradigm.
Christianity, white versus black. It's all part of the same game.
And it's binary as well. Isn't it funny? All these things are binary choices. There's no such thing as, the grey. But think a bit of that, think a bit of that. No. You're politics. You're blue or you're red. Or as you say, religion. You're this or you're this. And it's like, no, that's all nonsense. But again, this is where we go into like the stuff that David Icke was talking about who really runs the world and these secret societies. It's top-down driven to control us that way by separating us, thinking that we're all these different groups and inwardly fight, and exactly that. And that's all ego-based, yeah.
And I remember on Instagram, there was a chap who came across my algorithm, and his goal was to actually unite both parties. And so he'd do a post saying, right, it was a US account. He said, right, if you're a Republican, I want you to comment things you like about the Democrats. And it did the same for the other side. It's like Democrats, right, what you respect about the Republicans.
Yeah, brilliant.
And you realise that most people are actually just in the middle.
Isn't it the case?
Most people they all like the same thing. Yes. Like, okay, we care. Like some people, okay.
We don't like poverty. We want to live in a safe neighborhood. And this is it. Exactly. But people are actually, as you say, we probably agree with what we think is how society should be.
And when you become so tied to one party, you're completely blind to their weak spots. It's insane just how strong your belief system is. And the reality is, you've got the elites on one side who are, we could say evil, or, they're doing certain things. And then you've got the other side and there's going to be maniacs there. Do you know what I mean? It's like, rather than thinking party, you just think, okay, can we come together towards a common goal?
Well, the political system in most countries, practically every country, is there to keep us divided and inwardly fighting. They've got the current thing going on with the issue with immigration. Yes, it's an issue. It's clearly an issue. The numbers are just ridiculous. But it's deliberately being set up that way. It's deliberately happening to create these problems so that we inwardly fight. People then start blaming the immigrants. And yes, there's some nasty people who have come into this country, and there's some lovely people that have come into this country. Nonetheless, there's problems with the numbers and having enough facilities to support everyone. But it's been orchestrated from a higher level to create this inward fighting at the lower levels. While they still take our money, they still waste it on their own agendas and all this kind of stuff. And people need to wake up to where they need to not be driven into this hatred and us versus them and othering and all that kind of stuff. We're all human beings.
But I think my question then, because this has really fascinated me recently, because I'm a big fan of the idea, raise your vibration and then you'll be able to, that will disperse onto 100%. The people around you and they will help other people.
Yeah.
But then if you look at history and you look at recently in Nepal as well, where you've had these revolutions and people have still stood up to the government and they've taken over. So that interests me as
yes. Well. I mean, this is, so now we're going to the reason what is our purpose on earth, I suppose, and what is life about and all that. And, in recent years, I've delved into more spiritual reading I've gone through all this process of how the world really works. And now I've realized it's the spiritual side. That's what's important because it's about how we decide to live. And I am very much of the belief that we are ongoing spirits having a current experience. So my spirit's in my body right now, having the experience that I'm having right now on Earth. But it's a small part of our existence, which is infinity. And the reason that I'm here, or any of us are here, is to learn and develop our spiritual selves through the challenges that exist in a duality Earth, as it were. Earth has always been for humans a tough time. And it's meant to be that way because we get presented with these challenges, and it's us to decide how we react to these challenges to allow our spiritual growth. That's my belief. I think we are going through, we're all one. What is God in my view? God is essentially all, and we're part of that all. And we are here in our subjective experience to learn through being here. And the world, with this yin yang, the world is full of horrible things, really, dark stuff. And people question, how can there be a God if there's dark stuff? But I strongly believe that it's a deliberate experience to realize that we are more than just our physical selves, and how we can evolve through those limitations that the ego sits in and develop ourselves. So the world is supposed to be the way it is. It's always been that way. Medieval times, ancient Rome, it's always been the way it is. Yeah, pretty
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It reminds me when I went to an art museum in Holland, and it was all about like a museum of life. And there was a beautiful mosaic.
Yeah.
There was a beautiful mosaic on the wall, and they had different figures at different periods of time. So they had the modern day people on their phones and computers, and they went all the way back. So they went, Battle of Hastings, and then the Roman times, and Jesus's time, and 1800s, and it had all these different years, and they all had speech bubbles. And it was interesting because the speech bubbles throughout all the same, throughout all the history, was the same, and they're using modern speak, like, oh, fuck you, shut the hell up.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was a beautiful message that the problems that we're experiencing now, they're not unique to us.
Exactly.
They've been happening for
and moreover,
centuries.
In a duality earth, it's meant to be that way. This is what we're here to experience. The darkest of the dark is there for us to recognize exists, and we decide everyone has had horrible times in their life. Every single human being on the planet. And that's meant to be there, I believe, for us to develop how do we decide how to react to that, what our intentions are despite what these things are, and evolve your spiritual self. And if you work inwards and raise your spirits, you start to realize that is the way we combat these things, and that slowly raises everyone's energies up, and there's this slow awakening about how life should be. And
I do feel as though the world is awakening, and on that point, actually, I know a big Christian argument was, again, how could God exist if there's so much evil? And it was, as you suggest, without the evil, you can't have the good, because then you can't choose which way of life you want to live.
I've recently gone down I'm currently reading the Course of Miracles, which is a book that's tending to be the real teachings of Jesus, indicating that what's in the Bible, really so much of it actually is misrepresentation of what Jesus was teaching us. But an interesting thing from that was saying that God did not create our universe. The universe is created by our collective mind, all our minds, everything as created within this limitation of the universe as we see it, which is just a huge limitation of what is God. And God is beyond that. And we have everything in life is with consent. So a big part of that is we've consented to come down to earth and experience what we're experiencing. But that's all our choice for our own spiritual learning, to evolve away from it, to understand through duality the pathway you want to do, the path of service to self or service to others. That is our choice to do that. And we've created this away from God to remind ourselves how to go back to God. Kind of like the Garden of Eden thing. It's in one way of looking at it, rather than God banishing Adam and Eve, we banished ourselves, and we're realizing we never had to be banished, and it's entirely for our choice to come back if we want to. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how I'm starting to realize, is that the universe and all the horrible stuff that exists in it, all the suffering that exists in it, exists away from God. And we're learning how to come back to God through the understanding of what darkness is and what the light is. For our soul's journey. Yeah, that really resonates with myself too. And as we were alluding to earlier, I do feel as though the world is waking up, right? When I feel that. Because these world events are happening, and people are starting to think and actually question it. I'm not doing all this rubbish. Yeah, I'm not going along with it. That seems to be happening a bit more.
Yeah.
And it's like the crack in the dam, isn't it? It seems like the inevitable's happening from a positive point of view, where people are there's too much awareness now.
Yes.
Like the 100th monkey syndrome. That information's there now. And I think, we're seeing the awakening of humanity, I think.
And and you look at, how old are you now, for example?
42.
42. I can't imagine there's many left, even at your age, who are watching mainstream news, mainstream media. I think it's probably that age where people are probably still tuning in actively, like going on the TV, watching the news.
Yeah, I can't tell you the last time I watched mainstream anything. Yeah.
I think people are going to podcasts now. That's why these independent platforms are going to be so important.
Yes, these are brilliant. Yeah, I love podcasts because it allows, without interruption, without agendas. I mean, the news isn't news anymore. You know, on the occasion when I decide to see what's out there in the mainstream, it's comical. News should be about here's what's happened and allow a balanced opinion on whatever event. Now if it's GB News, we think this about it, and this is our viewpoint about it, or if it's the BBC, we think about this. I don't want your opinion. Just present the facts and a balanced point of view as far as you can do for the audience. That's what journalism is supposed to be about. And somehow we've evolved into this kind of ridiculous, it's a show really.
It's not truth seeking.
It's not truth seeking. It's narrative driving. Yeah, that's all it is. And creating this binary sort of nonsense with any topic. You're either on this side or that side. And if you're on that side, I hate you and all this kind of stuff. And yes, it's. But as I say, that's all coming from, again, these same elites who are deliberately trying to keep people in control under fear and separation.
Do you believe we're heading into a spiritual war? And the reason why I ask this is because you saw with the death of Charlie Kirk, for example, where you suddenly had people celebrating his death because he had an opinion. So does it now become less of a left versus right, or is it a good versus evil? And do you think that's a necessary part of our evolution then, based on what we've discussed here today?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know, but that would make sense in for what you're saying. I don't know, but again, what I find interesting with the Charlie Kirk thing, it was 5 minutes ago. There was, cancel culture where the left had all the power, or what is called the left had all this power of cancel culture. Charlie Kirk dies, and there's almost this flick to now, the right now has the cancel culture power. And it's like, it's orchestrated. This is all orchestrated narrative, and I don't buy into it. So I see all that kind of stuff playing out as, if things seem to happen out of nowhere, then it's a driven agenda.
It does seem very like a show, doesn't it?
It's a show, exactly. It's all a show. So what I find myself doing, I sort of touch on, I don't avoid this sort of stuff. I kind of aware of it, but I don't let it affect me. I just see it almost as, okay, that's what they're doing now. That's interesting. It boils down to whatever's going on out there. What am I doing? How am I deciding to react to my fellow person on a day-to-day basis at the present moment? That's all that matters. But what does that mean in terms of this? The left and right thing has kind of doesn't make any sense now anyway. The Labour Party in this country isn't following any of the traditional left-wing principles that the Labour Party was based upon. You go back to the immigration thing. The Labour Party traditionally was about the working class. And one of the things that wouldn't support the working class is bringing in so many immigrants from outside that the competition for jobs is such that people can't get employed, or it's lowering the wage, or all this kind of stuff. Well, that doesn't seem to add up. And, there doesn't seem to be any of these traditional values that used to exist. It seems to be just elite-driven agenda. And when it's an elite-driven agenda when both sides of the house are on the same song sheet. So we go back to what was going on with, the COVID pandemic, and I don't even think it was a pandemic, and we can go into why I think that, but, what was going on in that period. No one was standing against it. It was both sides of the house were just on the exact same song sheet. This is how it must be. In fact, Labour, who was opposition at the time, was saying, let's lock them down harder. Why aren't you doing this even more and more? And then as time's gone on and you reflect back, it's almost by surprise. Lockdowns didn't really work, or wearing face masks didn't really work, or staying 2 meters apart didn't really work. But experts, the real experts, were saying that right back in 2020. Because really politics now isn't about this true traditional left and right that we used to be historically. And even then, you go back to World War II, there was corruption and all that sort of stuff. But really now it's just an absolute nonsense. There's pretense going on. But as I say, what you know, on one level, it's trying to create a divide. You're either blue or you're red, kind of inward fighting. But when it's in, you know, the elites need you to do something, they're both on the same page. And, you know, there was one MP, do you know Andrew Bridgen? He was an MP who wanted discussions around why was, because this is true, by the way, people were terrified about dying when the so-called pandemic was going on. And understandably, because the media was telling you to be terrified. But it was after the jabs came out that the death rates were getting higher. So after the initial peak, that's when the highest death rates are supposed to exist, and numbers are all over the place about how many people are dying, the death rates increased after people were jabbed. But suddenly no one's talking about it. Well, people didn't know about it because no one's talking about it. People aren't aware, and they're not frightened now because they're not told to be frightened. But Andrew Bridgen, an MP, I think it's North Leicestershire he was at the time, he was a Tory MP, and he actually was very pro what the government was saying because he believed it to be true because he didn't know any different. But he had a bad side effect, and he had constituents coming up to him telling him they had bad side effects from these jabs. And he said, I think we need to have a discussion about this. And we need to have a discussion broadly why the death rate's going up. And he didn't even attribute it purposefully, saying, it must be the jabs. He said, why are we having such high death rates now? You know, after the event of the pandemic. And, what happened to him was he got booted out of the Conservative Party for claims of being anti-Semitic, which clearly was nonsense when you know what the reason was. He was clearly not making anything anti-Semitic, but a reason to get rid of him. Became an independent, and even though he was a hugely popular MP, he won, I think it was in 2010, he won his first election in an area which was very much a Labour stronghold. He won it but his popularity increased since then because he was a genuine MP. And people could see he was a genuine MP, so people voted for him, even though it was, let's say, traditionally, I think, a Labour seat. But when he became an independent, somehow he lost that election. Makes you realise again, who really does decide who wins what. And that was one guy who really stood up against what was the big narrative, and they destroyed him. They got rid of him.
But this is that famous quote, isn't it? If you really could have an impact on the world by voting, they wouldn't let you vote.
Exactly. If voting made any difference, they wouldn't let you vote. And the probably the most democratic thing this country's done, because we're not a democratic country. We're a constitutional monarchy, which is very, very different from democracy. But the most democratic thing this country did was the Brexit vote. And that was interesting, that one, because I don't know how much the result was expected, because ever since then, the system did everything possible to, and we haven't really left the EU, not in real terms, just the bits that made life awkward for the common person, but still following the silly laws and following the narratives that should be followed and all this kind of nonsense. So we haven't really left it. But that was the most democratic thing we did, and it was everything was done to say, no, that's ridiculous. You can't allow this. And what's interesting was everyone said the economy's going to crash and the pound's going to drop and all this kind of stuff, and they kept that narrative going. Actually, the economy went up after Brexit, but that narrative was suppressed.
I think the underlying theme here is we're all just part of this simulation and this game, and
it's your choice whether to play along with it, or do you know what? I'm not part of it. I'll look at it because it's around us and people talk about it. But what I've learnt is, Westminster doesn't represent me. This country that we live in, is where do I live? I live in this island that we call Great Britain. The Romans, the Greeks called it Britain. That's where I live, fundamentally. I live in this piece of land, this island called Great Britain. Westminster is just a political system that pertains to be our overlords. And people seem to sort of accept that. And it's like, well, the politician is supposed to serve the public, not the other way around. And yet we seem to have this system where the politicians seem to be our overlords and telling us what to do. But the only reason I put up with whatever they push on us is under threat of arrest, essentially. I know that if I don't do something that they push on us, then I'll be arrested and okay, I'll play along. But I just see them nothing more than the mafia. With the police force to enforce what they want to enforce and threats of courts and things. but I don't respect them. I don't recognise them. You know, Westminster is a corrupt system that, you know, as I say, is elite driven and pretends to be there for us, but surprisingly make all these horrible, ridiculous decisions that seem to just make our lives harder, don't they? Funny that.
Well, this is why I think coming back to the man's journey, being very careful about what you're giving your energy to. I mean,
exactly.
This is the main message of all of this. It's okay, just notice when your egoic mind is getting dragged into a situation and take a step back and just question everything. And I feel like a lot of that journey starts by questioning your own story. And once you unravel the own belief systems that you've lived your life by, then you can start seeing the world clearly. But I think until you've gone really, really deep within yourself, until you've gone to that place, I think it's very difficult to get through all these layers of the egoic mind and see the truth of the world, because you're gonna see everyone and call them a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah,
I think at this point,
I got all that last night, by the way, at the family dinner. Yeah, and it's because you happen to say something that contradicts the big narrative.
That's it. That's it. It goes against the narrative, and it. Well, what is it? That saying, you know, if you're saying the truth, then that's gonna get silenced, because it's a collective belief system. And I've always believed whatever society's doing, whatever everyone else is doing, do the opposite. Don't follow the crowd. It's
What's that? I can't remember who said it now, but it's that saying of you know, the world of universal deceits, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And boy, does, you know, have I experienced that in the last few years. It really is. You know, and I mean, using again the COVID thing as a great example. I was saying early doors, highlighting a lot of the nonsense in terms of the you know, the measures that were put in place, the value of the jabs that were coming out, and how ridiculous they were. And I was saying at the time, not because I knew about it, but I was listening to the experts, the real experts, not the Chris Whitties and those who are all bought and paid off puppets of the system, but real experts. And you know, and at the time I was being critiqued for deciding not to take it and all this kind of stuff, and even had, because I was, you know, I'm a paramedic, I'm a registered paramedic, and at the time they were going to sack me essentially for not taking it. It got to 2 weeks before they reversed the decision. All this kind of horrible stuff. But what's happened since then is things have really come out to highlight, it was all a lie essentially. So, for example, there was a commissioned report in the EU to highlight that Pfizer lied. That's it. Pfizer lied. It was announced, you know, in the EU Parliament that Pfizer lied about their data, because they tried to hide it. In America, they tried to hide it for 75 years. Can you believe that? Why would you hide your data for 75 years? And the judge there, thank God, said, no, you got to release it. But obviously, they did it in a very haphazard, difficult way. But, you know, people looked at it, put it together, and proved that they basically lied, or they misled people based on what can happen. So that happened quite recently, you know, 5 years later, whatever it was, after they rolled them out. And I shared that with, you know, in a family group on WhatsApp. Silence. Absolute silence. Because it's a case of, really, it's easier to lie to people than to tell them they've been lied to.
Yeah, can we convince them they've been lied to? Yeah, I really resonate with that. And again, I think it goes with all the life lessons, really. Someone could tell you something. And this is what I found in my podcast episodes. So sometimes I would batch record my episodes and listen to them back 3 months later when it's time to produce them. And I realized that the life lesson that my guest has shared with me about his life, I'm reliving the same lesson now. So I've been given a warning in advance, and yet I've repeated the same mistake that he has. And I think you have to really experience it yourself and be affected by it deeply for the lesson to really hit.
Yeah.
And a big argument someone told me when I was speaking up about this stuff was, you know, you haven't died from a disease, so, you know, how could you possibly comment on the efficacy of vaccines and stuff? And I said, well, you know, let's look at it another way. You know, have you been affected by have you had any health impacts from taking the vaccine? So it's a similar way. You know, you can never relate to people if you haven't experienced it.
Yeah,
yourself.
There's a book I read. What's the name of the author? He's a German guy who's a doctor, and, you know, a medical doctor and PhD, and very clever guy, well-read guy, and he wrote a book called The Indoctrinated Mind. I'm trying to think, remember his name, but great book. And it was basically using the COVID period as a great example about why people allow themselves to be indoctrinated, even what we perceive as intelligent people, because you realize that actually, if you start to be that contrarian to something like that, you get ostracized by society, and that's a big fear for people, to be ostracized. And that's why you get very intelligent people who will convince themselves to just go along with it, because they know if they apply too much thought against it, they're going to be pushed out from society, and that's a horrible place to be. And that's when you challenge people on that, they get very defensive. It's like, you call it the Stockholm syndrome, if you like. It's kind of like, I bought into it, so I even though this isn't, if you really thought about it, you can see how ridiculously bad it's been for people. But because they bought into it and signed up to it, maybe put a little profile picture relating to how much they're so for what this is and that is, and then to realize, hang on, this has all been a sham. And I mean, that's a hard thing to admit.
You're going to double down. Yeah, you need
people
to protect,
double down.
Yeah, you got to protect it. And I think this is just a big lesson in terms of going about your life too. People are always going to tear you down. Doesn't matter what you do. You look at Jesus as the best example of that. It really is. Yeah. Spoke the truth, and then he got crucified for it.
He did. Yeah, exactly.
So if you've got dreams, if you want to put your voice out there, just do it. People are going to try and tear you down either way. There's going to be judgment there.
Well, even better than that, Harrison, I now live my life with, I will never force my views onto people. But if people ask me a question, I'll answer. And I'll say it how it is. And I'll say the truth as it is. And actually, surprisingly, I've only had a few times where people have been really nasty or disparaging because I'm saying something weird or wacky, or seemingly so, because it's against the narrative. But I commonly get one of two reactions. One of, what? It's a bit strange. Okay, let's ignore that. Let's pretend that was never said or whatever. Or people go, oh, tell me more.
This is why it's so important to remove the egoic mind and speak with people.
You'd be amazed how many people will open up to it. Have
a debate with people. Yeah. And this is what I do believe where our society has failed in a way, is just labeling people who have an opinion and not actually hearing them out and understanding them and on a deeper level. And when you actually conversate with someone, my best podcast episodes have been where we've disagreed on topics, but we've found common ground. And that is, I think, the game that we've got to play, rather than sort of shrugging somebody off. And you mentioned a great point there, is using discernment, knowing when to speak up. Because I work with nice guys. It's been a big part of my journey, the nice guy syndrome, escaping that, not having an opinion, avoiding conflict, being nice and agreeable, but to avoid the rejection of other people to gain their approval. And a big struggle a lot of men have is, oh, okay, so I've got to be authentic. So does this mean I'm 100% expressive all the time? And I think this is where you've got to have discernment and know who your audience is. So like you were saying, when I first went through my spiritual awakening, I thought, everyone's got to know about this. I've got to help everyone.
The same thing.
You've got to save the world.
You've got to listen to me.
This is it. Life is so beautiful.
Yeah.
And you realize, and this is a realization, that has to come from them. You can't, it has to come from them. But
if you keep your energies raised, it will happen. It naturally happens anyway. You don't have to worry about it. These moments will happen.
Because you're an example, and there's almost like a curiosity there. Okay, how are they operating in that frequency? And that's, I think, how we can have this ripple effect.
And it's happening. I think you mentioned earlier that there's a great awakening. I think so too. I really do. And I think the Earth's going through a big elevation in energies. And we're seeing the dark elite's control sort of dying out, and Earth's evolving through this duality, solar plexus region of existence, if you will, into the more heart chakra, we're all one, the ego suppressed kind of existence. I think that's happening now. The ripple effect's happening now, I think.
Yeah, I'd like to. I think that's the optimistic view, and that's the way I like to see it. Again, coming back to the spirituality aspect, I think life's just a lot more enjoyable when you have got that perspective of, okay, we're here for a limited period of time, and then we're off elsewhere, and we never really leave. And I think that just gamifies this whole experience. And when you're so
there's
attached
nothing to fear. That's the important thing. That's what I've learned. Fear is, something we can go down, but fear is just an ego-associated emotion. You don't have to associate with it. There is nothing to fear. We aren't limited by our bodies. It's as you said, this is just a present experience that we're having, and enjoy that experience. Have that experience. We're here for a reason. It's a real. I believe the Earth experiences of us being in these bodies and being on Earth is a tough challenge. But it's like the analogy of deciding to climb Mount Everest. Say, you do it not because it's easy. You do it because it's hard, and the gains you'll get from going through such challenge and toughness and difficulty. You don't climb Mount Everest going, oh, this hurts, this is horrible, there's no point being here, kind of thing. You're there for that reason. You're there for that challenge to get something out of it, and that's why we're here. This is what we're doing.
And it's such an important part of the man's journey is seek discomfort. Look for the challenging times, look for the hard times. And I look back at
don't fear them. That's the other thing. Don't fear it.
But I think just a change of perspective. And I think once you realize that every difficult moment of your life, if you allow it to be, can be a stepping stone into the next period of this enlightenment, then doesn't mean the challenging times don't come. Doesn't mean you don't experience the depths of human emotion and pain, but it means that no matter how hard it gets, that there's something on the other side, because it's part of your soul's evolution.
Essentially, knowing that there's nothing to fear. Enjoy the ride. I mean, my favourite comedian is Bill Hicks, and he has this. I shared it with you, didn't I? I shared this little clip of one of his shows in the early 90s, and he just finishes off that life is just a ride. We're on a roller coaster ride. And all we have to choose while being on this roller coaster ride is to choose fear or love. It's a choice. We can choose that and enjoy the ride.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it ties back in with our conversation before about embracing the emotions. We have this opportunity to feel the depths of human emotion. Why not embrace it? Why push that away?
Yeah. We're here to experience. We're here to learn. Enjoy the roller coaster ride. Absolutely.
Did you have a moment then? Because I know for me, it was when my identity first started to be rocked when I was 19, hit depression for the first time, and that's when I started looking for answers. So did you have a moment like that which shifted your...
Yes, I did. So I mentioned I was in the ambulance service as a paramedic, and 2016, I went through a very selective selection process to get onto the helicopter emergency medical service for Essex and Herts Air Ambulance, and I got through. It was very very competitive, and I got a position. I thought, wow, I was very chuffed to myself, very proud of myself. Wow, I managed to get into this experience, to get into HEMS, and what shocked me was it was on an emotional level, it was horrible for me. And what I realised was actually I was suffering a lot working in the ambulance service because my father died when I was 11 years old. And I found him dead in the bed. And I remember at that time thinking, I need to do something called CPR, but I don't know how to do it and all this kind of stuff. And I felt that failed him and that's why he died. And I always had that in my head.
Wow.
So I've realised since that I joined the ambulance service on a subconscious level, perhaps, without really being fully aware of it, to make amends for that mistake. So over the years, whenever I went to a patient, cardiac arrest, they've died, I failed my dad kind of thing. And when I went onto HEMS, you went to all the sort of big jobs, as it were. So you went to all the big traumas and cardiac arrests, or sort of what they determined as survivable cardiac arrest. Certain patients have a good chance. Let's go and send the resources out to them. So I saw a lot of cardiac arrests in the 4 months I was there. And it pushed me over the edge. And basically I put my hand up and said, I think something's not right with me. From the moment I put my hand up, said something's not right with me, and managers gave me sort of phone calls and broke down crying a couple of times. And my wife will tell you up to that point, she only saw me cry twice in my life. And I was suffering really bad. So they did the decent thing of just calling me up one morning saying, yeah, we're ending your secondment. Don't come back. Lovely. Thanks very much. So just sort of kicked me to the curb, essentially. And anyway, I eventually through the ambulance service had therapy, and basically I was diagnosed with PTSD, and that's what I was suffering with. And I was treated horrendously by HEMS, went back into the ambulance service, and because it was work-related injury, as it were. I think the NICE guidelines, NHS NICE guidelines, are that you're supposed to have 20 sessions of therapy, I think, for PTSD or something like that. Anyway, after every 6, through the process, they have to reevaluate, do we fund you for more therapy kind of stuff. So I had my 6 sessions and then greenlit for the next, and I had my 7th one, I think it was. And then the day before my next therapy session, the therapist called me up and said, I don't know what's happened, Nathan, but you don't have a therapy session tomorrow. I thought, what's going on there? So I called my station officer, really nice guy, and he said, I don't know what's going on there, I'll find out. Called me back, he was sounding sheepish, nothing to do with him, but he said, I don't know how to say this, Nathan, but they've cut all funding for therapy. They just sort of blanket, someone made a decision in the ambulance service to cut funding. And I'm like, I'm in the middle of my therapy here. And anyway, part of what that was, it wasn't just the PTSD, but then I had this experience of being, as I perceived it, treated horribly by the system. And I was at my lowest, absolutely lowest. And I was getting, you go through these sort of scoring about, how bad you are. You probably had some similar during your depression period, you how much you score out of whatever for depression or anxiety, all these kind of things. And I was scoring very high, apart from one, which at the time I didn't understand, but now I understand. I was 0 for suicidal. I had everything else going on the scoring, but suicidal was 0. I had absolutely no concept of killing myself, but I was suffering mentally. But it was the moment where I realized the system's let me down. I'm not getting help from the system. I've got to sort myself out. And memory's hazy at the time, because I think during PTSD, your memory gets a bit funny. But I think someone directed me to Eckhart Tolle, and I got his audiobook, and something told me just go. There's like near where I live, there's a forest. So I went down to the forest, put in the audiobook, started walking around, and part of it was him emphasizing the importance of living the present, living the now, appreciating something as simple as a flower. And I was in the woods at the time, and as he said it, there was a flower there, and I stood there just looking at the flower and just admiring this singular beauty at this moment of this flower. And it was that spark of realization of, what I needed to do. It was about me looking inside. What can I do, and what do I need to work on to start? And it went from there, really. And now I look back at that time as the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm to the people that, kick me to the curb. Well, you're too much, you're too difficult, problem, out you go. The ambulance service, absolutely. Well, I essentially, they I could have sued them, really, based on what they did. But I say thank you. Thank you for putting me in a position where I had the opportunity to recognize who I really am. And that's what got me to that. And as you're saying, you had a similar event, didn't you? So it's these. I think a lot of people who, we use the term "wake up spiritually" have those events, don't they?
And you kind of need that to completely shake your reality. And as you say, it's only during the time I can imagine. And also that experience when you're 11, that is, and the fact that you only, as you alluded to, your wife only saw you crying twice. Beforehand. So you've obviously learned as a trauma response to suppress your emotions. Yeah. And it's through your emotions that you discover the answer, as we've alluded to before.
Absolutely
sitting with yourself. So this whole process has really been you uncovering all the layers, getting this trauma out of your body, getting these barriers out of the way so that you can feel again. You mentioned there the system letting you down. A lot of the time, this is my reservations with the current system. A lot of the time, especially when they diagnose, I can't speak for everyone, but my general consensus is when they diagnose SSRIs, antidepressants, they're numbing you to feeling. And when you can't feel, how are you supposed to come out of that?
Well, that was another thing, Harrison. Another example. So my GP during that time period, my GP referred me because I had to go to the GP to officially be declared sick and therefore go off sick, and I got referred to my local mental health trust, and I think it was 6 weeks before I finally got contact from them, and it was a phone call from a nurse who again was taking me through the same questionnaires. I'm like, I've done all this, but okay, same questionnaires. And at the end she said, right, no, you are showing signs of depression, so I'm going to prescribe you some antidepressants. And I said to her, I really don't want to go down the antidepressant route. And she said, well, are you really suffering then? and or something to those lines. Exactly. And I actually broke down crying at that point because I was just like, what is going on here?
What a joke.
Exactly. And I said, no, I just want to try other means, which I found out eventually. That's why, as I say, I said, look, I've got to work this out myself, really. But that was it. I got a phone call, a questionnaire, have some antidepressants. No thanks. All right then. That was it. That was the whole. And I knew, my intuition knew, not to take antidepressants. I needed to face my trauma and work through it. And I was so glad that I didn't go down that route. Yeah.
Talk me through that, because there's two elements there. There's facing the traumas in the darkest parts of yourself. And then there's the second part, which is the lifestyle changes, the presence, the sunlight, the natural stuff, which is healing for you.
It all came together, really. It was by realizing I had to look inwardly to solve my issues. And again, as I say, things are a bit hazy as to the order of events there, because I found that during my PTSD, when it all sort of came out, it's hard to remember things clearly. But it all just led to the inevitable truth. It's the answer to raising your energies, essentially. To manage your traumas is about raising your energies, and it comes with recognizing living the present, recognizing what the ego is, all that kind of stuff. It just leads you down to that.
And I believe, this is where I believe, people say, oh, I'm not spiritual. It's like, we're all spiritual beings. And it's such an important part of the recovery process, because once you realize you are not your thoughts, you're a soul, you're a being in this human suit, you can separate yourself and you realize, okay, this is a program that I've been living by. It's my subjective experiences of the world. It's not me. I wasn't born into this world. Like, as Harrison, or you weren't Nathan, this religion. It's like, these are all
these labels. You're not these labels. Yes.
But that's not you. These are labels and identities that you've taken on.
Exactly. And when you take that to its logical conclusion, we're all one. All is one. And if we're therefore all one, how on earth can we hate each other? Because we're all connected.
That's it. And exactly. And I know in a religious setting, it's, well, if you're hating somebody else, then you're hating God in a way, because we're all made in the image of God. So it's that, what I'm gathering there is that awakening to spirituality, separating yourself from your...
Yeah, I wouldn't say separating. I think the ego is always part of us, but it's learning to almost tell the ego who's boss. The ego's not boss, I'm the boss. But it will always be part of you, but it's controlling. And the analogy I use with the ego is it's like having a really powerful dog, Rottweiler, whatever. And if you don't control it, it will cause mayhem problems. It will go around, tear up a shop or something, and give you like very big difficulties. But if you learn to control that ego and say, I'm the boss, and make sure that dog is knowing you're the master, it can be a very powerful tool, actually. So I don't ever say the ego is something we ignore, but knowing it's just a fraction of who we are, and it's there for us to be recognized. You're not the boss, I am.
And it's that self-acceptance, right? And it's knowing that, okay, if we didn't have that ego, then we'd cross the road without looking, and we'd get run over by a bus or something.
Right,
I think it's also a big part of it is acknowledging these sort of shadow, darker sides to yourself, and actually having a conversation with them, understanding them,
and forgiving them. We've all got dark thoughts, if you like. People don't want to admit it, but we've all got them. We've all got these really, because the ego comes up with them. That ego part of you has these dark thoughts. We've all got the capability of doing horrible things. And people don't like to admit that, but you do. But we make choices in life, whether, as I said earlier, service to others or service to self. We make these choices, and that's fine. It's fine to have these thoughts in your head, perhaps, that you might think, that's a bit dark, perhaps at times. But they happen less and less as you recognize that and live your life in higher energies. They dwindled right down, and that's proving that you're in control of it.
Yes, and again, there's just this idea of presence. It's so simple. It's a very great way of disarming fear, because you realize, okay, this fear is usually towards a future event. And the future, as you were saying, it's not a real thing, because all you've ever had is the present.
It's only the present. There's no such thing as time. And that's the point. There's only ever the present. Yes.
And even in that fear scenario, if something were to happen, let's say a guy pulls out a knife and they're going to attack you, you're not in that fearful state. You're just in fight or flight. You're just living in the present. So even in that worst case scenario, you're not even in fear.
Yes.
You're kind of just reacting.
Yes, that's right.
In a certain way.
That's right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, I agree with that.
So yeah, I think there's so much to learn from your story, and I think if there's one thing there's plenty we can take away from it. I imagine in your recovery journey, a big part of it has been just learning to go within yourself, right? And then once you go within yourself and actually take the time to be with yourself, I wonder if there was any somatic practices in there, because from my perspective, sometimes if we talk therapy, for example, can be very helpful, but a lot of trauma is stored in the body as well. And I know in my case, what was really helpful for me was actually doing psychosomatic work. So going deep into mushroom ceremonies, ayahuasca, and
I'd like to try that one day, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is why it's so powerful, because you relive a lot of these traumas, some of which you might not even be aware of. All these blockages in your body.
I've heard that people have experienced it. Yeah, as you say, I didn't even know I had this trauma. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yes, and that's one tool. There's all different types of tools and stuff, and just because we're on record, I'd say make sure it's in a professional setting. And
I think the best advice I could give people is when things get overwhelming. The simplest trick is pause. Slowly breathe in, hold a sec, slowly breathe out, hold it a second, and just repeat that a few times. And just by doing that, you force yourself to bring yourself to the present, and you will calm down because you're focusing on the present and not on what happened in the past and being miserable about whatever that was, or worrying about whatever the future is. There's only the present. And by doing simple, conscious, current breathing exercises can make a huge difference.
What do you have a certain structure to it then? Because I know for me, it would be 2 breaths in through the nose and then very slowly out through the mouth.
Okay. Yeah.
And I felt like that when I do that over a couple of minutes, it would just shift my reality and make me a bit more present.
Yeah, for me, it's just breathe in slowly through the nose, breathe out slowly through the nose. That's it. Simple as that.
I think life is very simple, but it's the world we live in.
Do you know what I've learned, Harrison, as well? And I've read so much and listened to so many podcasts, and actually the answers are, in principle, very, very simple. But the doing of these simple things is very hard, because to remind yourself not to give in to the ego can be hard at times, but the answer remains the same. It's live in the present, raise your energies. And the other thing is the best thing you can do in life is avoid judgment and forgive any given situation you experience. Rather than judge, forgive. By doing that as a habit, you'll feel better about life in general.
I think what helps me in terms of the forgiveness part is that, I think a lot of the time people can struggle to forgive, but it can be a reminder that sometimes you're not forgiving for the other person, it's for yourself.
Yeah. There was a great example of this. There was this woman whose family was killed in a concentration camp, and she got to meet the commandant. And I can't remember the circumstances, but to face him, and their intentions and what she was there for was to forgive him. And she said, "I forgive you." I think that's powerful. I mean, it's not what a thing to forgive someone for, but she realized it was important for herself to do that, to take away all this negativity.
And once you forgive people, it's no longer stored there. There's no longer this resentment. And again, ties back to what we were saying. Feel that emotion. It's valid. Recognize it.
But then it dissipates.
The
negative stuff dissipates, yeah. And you feel lighter because it's a high frequency. That's, as Dr. Hawkins said, there's a reason why we feel lighter, because the frequency changes.
And it's also, based on our conversation today, it's understanding that people are the way they are because of their subjective experiences of the world. We're all just a kid living in adult bodies. Everyone's all carrying their own shit from when they were younger. So it's like, how could you How could you even get offended by anything they say when you know it's just a projection of their own internal system?
Exactly. So forgive, and we're also, and I believe in, we've been reincarnated countless times, and we inherit past traumas. So we don't know what someone else is going through and why they're acting the way they are, the difficulties they've had in life, and the struggles they've had to get anywhere. So that's why if you could, to forgive, that's all you need to do is forgive. But by doing that, again, it all adds to that better experience for your own life.
Yes. Yeah. That's a wicked point. And yeah, we could go down several different rabbit holes down here. So perhaps we'll do a part 2 at some stage.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah.
That'd be wicked. Yeah. When the next calling comes for everyone to raise their frequencies, we'll get a good reminder in. What we'll do, we'll move into the closing traditions of the podcast. The first 2 are routine questions, are the same questions for every episode. And the third one is asked by a member of the Growth Voyage community.
Okay. Yeah.
They don't know who the guest is, but they've asked a question.
Okay.
The first question is a song recommendation.
Song recommendation? Oh, blimey. The thing is, my favourite music isn't actually a song. I love orchestral pieces. So Beethoven 7th is my favourite orchestral piece. There you go. I'll recommend that one. I love that piece.
Takes your mind to a different place, doesn't it? Yeah. One of my guests recommended Experience, and every time I listen to that now, and he mentioned it on the podcast, every time you listen to it, it'll take your mind to a different place. And it's when you listen to that orchestral, sometimes classical music, it really does take you down some different rabbit holes and gets you really reflecting.
The music's amazing. The classical music's just something else. Yeah. Yeah. No words, but it tells you more than words can. Yeah.
It's incredible. And it's taken me a while to really appreciate the art. So yeah, wicked suggestion. The second one, you've mentioned a couple already, but it's a book recommendation.
Yeah. It depends on where you are on your journey and stuff. For me right now, I'm reading The Course in Miracles, and that was really important for me. But I'll tell you what, recommendation, The Law of One. There you go. That was a big, that information wowed me. Yeah, Law of One, which is available free online, by the way. You can just Google Law of One, and there's a free PDF for people to access.
Fantastic. Yeah, wicked. I'll put it in the description, and I think but also mentioned quite a few throughout this episode, so I'll be sure to put them in the description. And you mentioned Eckhart Tolle there. I think he's great for the beginning of your journey.
Yeah, I don't actually listen to or read his stuff now, but at the time, it was important for me. As with David Icke stuff, I don't engage with that stuff anymore, but at the time, it was very powerful for me. Yeah.
The third one is asked by one of our Growth Voyage listeners, and it comes from Oliver Tamulan, who asked, what is the best advice you've ever received?
Oh, that I've received. Again, it's a bit of around that sort of specific advice, but those who taught me how to meditate, especially this one person, someone called Kathy, who's passed away now. She's moved into the spirit world. She taught me how to go deep with meditation. And that's probably the most important gift, I think. Yeah, so it's not advice per se, but taught me how to practice meditation.
Are there any tips you could perhaps recommend us at the moment? I appreciate it. There's different levels to it.
My honest answer is let people find their way. And as I mentioned earlier, the most basic thing you can do, and this was on the Eckhart Tolle was saying, is start with conscious breathing to recognize the power of living the present and shutting the voice of the ego and just breathing in, breathing out. So let that be your kind of initial realization why that's so good, because you feel that. I always say to people, find your own way after that, because it will naturally go the way you need it to.
Yeah, that's a wicked suggestion, and it ties into what we've discussed on the podcast too, about people figure out the answers by themselves.
If you raise your energies, don't worry about it. Let the pathway natural go. Yeah, it will take you where you need to go.
I love that. This has been a wicked conversation, Nathan.
Enjoyed it.
Where can people find you if they're interested in connecting with you?
I'm not on social media at all. I used to be on like I used to be on Facebook and had a Twitter account, but I've ended all that actually. So they can't actually. The only way people can contact me is if I give them my phone number. That's it really. It's not because I'm separating myself from people, but I kind of don't enjoy that social media kind of experience really. So yeah, there isn't really anyone unless I give you my number.
Well, feel free to message me personally, and we'll arrange it with Nathan if he feels cool to give that away.
Yeah.
Unless it's the elites who are going to track him down for his comments made today. But well, don't worry, it's safe with me. And yeah, this has been a wicked conversation, and I certainly do agree with the social media part. I think it's a very easy way to get sucked into the energy of what's going on in the world, and then you could also argue, well, hey, maybe you could spread light on that platform as well.
This is true. I've found for me though, I felt the impacts I've really made is through things like this, for example, just meeting people and bang, we hit it off and we start talking and it spreads that energy. I found that's really worked for me. Yeah. That's me.
Well, yeah, so many lessons learned from your story, brother. But thank you so much for.
No, you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah.
Appreciate you.
Yeah.